Welcome to MATLAB. Today, you're on your journey to discover decimal expansion using models. Remember, decimals are fractions whose denominators are powers of 10. A decimal fraction is a way of expressing values of fractions less than 1 using the normal decimal place value system extended to the right of the units column or units house so as to give values of 1 by 10, 1 by 100, 1 by 1000 and so on. For example, 1.376 means 1 plus 3 by 10 plus 7 by 100 plus 6 by 1000. Can I represent this number pictorially? Today, you're provided with a lab observation sheet. If you look carefully at your lab observation sheet, there are a number of picture grids. This square represents 1 unit. That is, the entire square when shaded represents 1 unit. This is a 10 by 1 grid. If I shade one part out of the 10 parts, it represents 1 by 10 or 0.1. Remember, a 10 by 1 grid is divided into 10 rectangles. Look at the denominator carefully. There is 1 0 in the denominator. Therefore, there is one number after the decimal point. This is a 10 by 10 grid. This grid has 100 squares. If I shade one square, it represents 1 out of 100 or 0.01. There are 2 zeros in the denominator. Therefore, there are 2 numbers after the decimal point. This is a 100 by 10 grid. It has 1000 small squares. If I shade one square, it represents 1 by 1000 or 0.001. There are 3 zeros in the denominator. Therefore, there must be 3 digits after the decimal point. How will I represent 1.376? Can I take an entire square and shade it to represent 1 or 1 unit? Now, if I shade 3 rectangles of my 10 by 1 grid, then I represent 0.3 or 3 by 10. Let me mark it for you. Now, if I shade 7 squares of my 10 by 10 grid, then I represent 0.07 or 7 by 100. If I shade 6 squares of my 100 by 10 grid, then I represent 6 by 1000 or 0.006. So, can I say 1.376 is equal to 1 plus 3 by 10 plus 7 by 100 plus 6 by 1000. In your lab observation sheet, if you are given the model of the decimal, then you are required to write its expanded form and what decimal this model represents. Let us look at this model. We have one entire unit shaded and 3 small squares in a 10 by 10 grid. Does this model represent 1 plus 3 by 100, which is nothing but 1.03? Remember, if the 10 by 1 grid is not shaded, then the place after the decimal point is represented by 0. Suppose you are given the decimal as 1.12. Can you represent its model and write it in the expanded form? Is it not one entire square, 1 out of your 10 by 1 grid and 2 squares out of your 10 by 10 grid? So I can say 1.12 is equal to 1 plus 1 by 10 plus 2 by 100. Suppose you are given the expanded form as 1 by 10 plus 1 by 100. Can you shade the grids to represent this decimal? Remember, there are no units, so I will not shade any units. 1 by 10, I shade 1 out of the 10 rectangles in the 10 by 1 grid. To represent 1 by 100, I shade 1 square in the 10 by 10 grid. Isn't this equal to 0.11? Have fun discovering expansion of decimals.